No nanny lasted a week with the millionaire CEO's twins, until I showed up and did the impossible. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought one phone call could change everything. My life had been quiet, almost painfully ordinary. I wasn't special, not by any measure. I was just a woman trying to rebuild herself after too many disappointments. My days blurred into one another. Wake up, work, go home, fall asleep, repeat. Nothing to look forward to, nothing to hold on to. Until the day my phone rang. The voice on the other end was polite, but there was a weight to it. They said a family needed help. 2 children, twins, living in one of the wealthiest homes in the city. Their father was a CEO, powerful, respected, untouchable. The job paid more than I'd ever seen on a contract before. A steady income, a place to live, stability. It sounded like the opportunity I'd been waiting for. And yet, something in their tone hinted at more. They didn't say it outright, but I could sense it. There was something hidden behind that offer. I told myself I was overthinking. Work is work, and I needed it. Still, as I packed my small bag and prepared to leave, a nervous energy followed me, like the air just before a storm. When I arrived at the mansion, I remember standing at the gates for a long moment, staring up at the house. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty you only see in magazines. Marble steps, golden lights spilling out of tall windows, iron gates that made me feel both small and unwelcome. To anyone else, it would have looked like a dream, but to me, it felt like a cage. The door opened before I even knocked. A maid ushered me in without a smile, without warmth. The silence in that place was heavy, as though sound itself was afraid to linger. I could hear my own footsteps echo on the marble floor, each one sharper than the last. And then, I saw them. The twins. A boy and a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. They stood at the top of the grand staircase staring down at me. Their faces were blank, their eyes too sharp, too old for children. They didn't smile, they didn't wave, they just looked, like predators studying their prey. Something twisted in my stomach, but I forced a smile and raised my hand in a small wave. "Hi," I whispered, though my voice trembled. They didn't respond. They only turned and walked away, their footsteps disappearing into the long, endless hall. The father didn't greet me either, not then. Instead, one of the staff handed me a schedule, strict and detailed, and told me the rules. The children were to be in bed by 8. They were to have lessons in the morning, play in the afternoon, dinner precisely at 6. No exceptions. It sounded normal enough, but the way it was spoken, cold, rehearsed, made it feel more like orders than guidance. The first hours were manageable. A spilled glass of juice, toys tossed carelessly on the floor, a tantrum when I asked them to eat their dinner. I told myself it was nothing unusual, that children acted out, that patience and kindness could soften even the hardest hearts. But by the end of the first day, I realized this was not normal. The boy locked me outside in the freezing night air, laughing through the window as I pounded on the glass. The girl tipped over her plate at dinner, scattering food across the floor, then demanded something else with a voice sharp as glass. Their eyes never left mine, as if waiting for me to snap, to give up, to prove I was no different from the others who came before me. And yet, I stayed. Because beneath their cruelty, I caught glimpses of something else, a flicker of pain behind their mocking smiles, a tremor in their laughter that sounded too much like a cry. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. That night, as I lay in the small guest room they had given me, I thought of the rumors I had heard, stories whispered by former staff, nannies who had left in the middle of the night, some in tears, some refusing to speak of what they had seen. Everyone said the same thing. The twins were impossible, cursed, dangerous, but no one ever explained why. I stared at the ceiling until sleep finally dragged me under, and I told myself one thing. Whatever this was, whatever secret was hiding inside those walls, I would find it. And deep down, a part of me already knew this job wasn't just about taking care of 2 children. It was about surviving something far darker than I could have ever imagined. The next morning began with the sound of screaming. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, but when I rushed into the hallway, I realized it was the twins. They were screaming at each other, their voices echoing through the house like a storm breaking loose. The staff didn't even flinch. They passed by with their heads lowered, as if this chaos was nothing unusual, as if they had learned to live inside the storm without ever questioning it. I tried to step in gently, speaking softly, hoping to calm them down. But the boy turned to me with eyes so cold it froze me in place. "You'll leave too," he said, his voice low but sharp, like he already knew my fate. The girl just laughed and walked away, leaving the argument unfinished. My skin prickled with unease. Children weren't supposed to sound like that. Children weren't supposed to look at someone like that. I wanted to believe patience would win, but the days ahead proved otherwise. They pushed every boundary. They threw food in my face when I served it. They scattered their toys down the staircase just to watch me clean them up. Once, they locked me in the storage room for almost an hour, and when I was finally let out, they were standing there with smug little smiles. The house staff never intervened. They only whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. And that's when I began to notice something darker. The twins weren't just misbehaving. They were repeating. Their words, their tone, even the way they mocked me. It felt rehearsed, as if they had learned it from someone else. I began to wonder, who taught them cruelty? The answer came one evening, when I finally met their father properly. He walked into the dining room, tall and commanding, every inch the man of power. His suit was pressed, his shoes shined, his voice calm but distant. When the twins misbehaved at the table, I thought, at last, he would step in. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, looked at me, and said coldly, "Do your job. They're just children." Just children. The words stung, because I could see the fear behind their defiance, the anger behind their eyes. This wasn't just children. This was something festering, something no one wanted to face, and he was the root of it. I felt it in the way his presence silenced the room, in the way the twins stiffened when he entered. Days turned into weeks, and the house grew heavier around me. Every morning I woke with dread. Every night I fell into bed with exhaustion. But something inside me refused to quit. I couldn't abandon those children, no matter how cruel they were. I saw too much of myself in their brokenness, too much of a pain that no one else had cared to mend. One night, I overheard the staff whispering in the kitchen. They spoke of the other nannies, how some had left crying, some had been forced out, and one had been dragged out by security in the middle of the night after accusing the CEO of mistreating the children. No one had seen her since. The staff hushed themselves when they saw me standing there, their faces pale, their mouths sealed. But I had heard enough to know. There was truth hidden in these walls, and it was darker than I could have imagined. The children began testing me harder. One evening, the girl pushed a glass vase off the table, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. As I bent down to clean it, she whispered in my ear, "He'll break you too." I froze, the words cutting deeper than any tantrum. What did she mean? Who had already been broken? Another night, I found the boy crying quietly in his room, his fists clenched, his body shaking. When I reached out to comfort him, he pulled away and shouted, "Don't touch me." But in his eyes I saw it, the fear, the desperation, the longing for safety he didn't believe existed. That was the moment I knew the cruelty wasn't natural, it was taught. It was survival. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but I wasn't ready for the truth, because the truth would force me to make a choice. Stay silent, like everyone else, or face a man who had destroyed everyone before me. And late one night, when the shouting began again, that choice was made for me. The walls trembled with his anger. The children's cries pierced through the silence. My heart pounded as I stepped into the hall, realizing I was no longer just their nanny. I was their only shield. But standing against a man like him had consequences, and I was about to learn just how far those consequences could reach. The night it all came crashing down started like any other. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The twins sat stiffly at the table, their eyes darting toward the empty chair where their father usually sat. He was late, and his absence made the air heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. I tried to make small talk, asking about their lessons, their drawings, anything to break the silence, but they barely answered, their voices low, their faces pale. When the front door finally slammed open, I felt the shift immediately. His footsteps echoed down the hall like thunder. The twins froze. Their forks clattered against their plates. And then he appeared, towering, sharp, his face twisted with an anger I hadn't seen before. "What is this?" he barked, slamming his hand against the table. His eyes swept over the spilled juice, the untouched vegetables, the faint mess of crumbs. To me, it looked like an ordinary meal with children. To him, it was fuel for rage. He turned on me first. His words were knives, accusing me of failure, of weakness, of being no better than the others who had walked out. "Do your job," he hissed, "or leave tonight." Before I could speak, the boy whispered something under his breath. I didn't hear it, but his father did. In one motion, he grabbed the child's arm and squeezed so hard the boy cried out in pain. "That's Sue," and the sharp, helpless cry burned into me. And suddenly, everything made sense. The cruelty, the defiance, the endless games. The children weren't born cruel. They were reflecting what they lived with every day. They had learned fear before they had learned love. And here he was, the man they called father, proving it with his grip on a boy too small to fight back. I froze. For a moment, I was just like all the others, afraid, powerless, ready to turn away. My chest tightened, my breath caught. Every instinct screamed at me to keep quiet, to survive. But then I saw their faces, the boy's tears, the girl's trembling hands clutching the edge of her chair. They weren't looking at their father. They were looking at me. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't invisible to them. I wasn't just another nanny to be broken. I was their last chance. Something inside me snapped. My fear turned into fire, my trembling into strength I didn't know I had. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but firm. Enough. The word echoed in the dining room, louder than I expected, louder than I had ever spoken. For a second, even he looked stunned. His grip loosened just slightly, enough for the boy to pull free and hide behind my arm. The girl slipped off her chair and joined him, pressing close to me like I was a shield they'd been waiting for. The CEO's eyes darkened. He straightened, towering over me, his jaw clenched in fury. "You don't tell me what to do in my house," he growled. His voice was low, dangerous, the kind that made the air itself heavy. But I didn't back down. My hands shook, but I stood my ground, the twins pressed against me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would tear through my chest, but I didn't move. Not this time. Not anymore. I could feel the moment stretching, fragile as glass. One wrong move, one wrong word, and it would shatter. His eyes locked on mine, daring me to flinch, daring me to break like all the others had. But I didn't. For the first time, someone had stood in his way. For the first time, his power cracked. And yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because defying a man like him had consequences. And once you drew a line against someone who lived on control and fear, there was no turning back. That night didn't end with victory. It ended with silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. He left the dining room without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hall like a promise of what was to come. The children clung to me, their small hands gripping tighter than ever, and I held them, even as dread curled in my stomach. I had protected them once. But how many times could I stand against him? How long before he made sure I disappeared? Just like the others who had dared to speak. I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the battle had begun, and none of us would leave this house unchanged. The next morning felt like a storm waiting to break. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you check over your shoulder every few seconds. The children stayed close, following me from room to room, their eyes wide and searching, as if making sure I hadn't vanished overnight. He didn't come down for breakfast. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. His absence was worse than his presence, because it meant he was thinking, planning, deciding what to do with me. I tried to keep the routine alive. Pancakes for the twins, juice in their favorite cups. I told them stories, silly ones about dragons and explorers, anything to make them laugh. And for a moment, they did. Their giggles filled the kitchen, light and real, like children are supposed to sound. That moment alone made everything worth it. But then the phone rang. I froze, spatula in hand. It was the house line, the one nobody ever used unless it was serious. His voice carried down the hall, low and sharp, each word like a blade. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught inussoid. And she thinks she can challenge me. No one makes a fool of me. Handle it. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just angry. He was dangerous. That day, the house became a trap. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. I packed a small bag in secret. Just a few clothes, the children's favorite toys, documents I found hidden in a drawer that looked too important to leave behind. But leaving wasn't simple. The gates were always locked, the staff loyal to him, and his influence stretched far beyond those walls. I knew if I tried to run blindly, he would find us. And yet, staying meant waiting for the inevitable. That night, as the children slept, I sat by their door, guarding them like a soldier. My thoughts spiraled. What if I was making things worse for them? What if he took them away from me just to prove he could? But then I remembered their faces at dinner, the way they clung to me after he stormed out. They needed me. Maybe for the first time in their lives, they had someone who wouldn't look away. And I made a promise to them and to myself. I would not abandon them, not like the others, not like the world already had. The breaking point came 2 days later. He called me into his office. The children weren't allowed in. The room smelled of expensive leather and smoke, the kind of place where deals were made and lives were ruined with a signature. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and calculating. "You think you're a savior," he said. "You think you're better than the ones before you. But let me remind you, this is my house, my children, my rules." I didn't answer. My throat was tight, but I kept my chin up. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me more than his shouting ever could. "People like you disappear all the time. Don't make me prove it." For a moment, I thought that was it, that this is where my story ended. But then, something unexpected happened. A small sound at the door. A gasp. The twins. They had followed me, pressed against the doorway, their little faces pale but determined. And they had heard everything. The girl's voice shook, but it cut through the tension like glass shattering. "Don't hurt her, please." He turned, eyes narrowing. "Go to your rooms." But they didn't move. Instead, they crossed the threshold and stood beside me, one on each side, holding my hands. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the only one standing up to him anymore. They were too. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His power came from fear, from silence, and suddenly, neither of those things worked. Not on me, not on them. The silence stretched. Then, with a bitter laugh, he waved us away. "Go," he muttered. "Get out of my sight." It wasn't victory, not exactly, but it was something. A crack in the walls he had built. A moment where his control slipped, if only for a breath. That night, I tucked the children into bed and sat beside them until they fell asleep. My hands were still shaking, my mind still racing. But there was hope now. Fragile, trembling hope. Because in their eyes, I saw it. The belief that things could change. That love, once given, could not be unlearned. And as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I knew this wasn't just about me, or even about them. It was about every child who grows up in the shadow of fear. Every family trapped in silence. Every person told they don't matter, that their voice means nothing. I was just one girl. But maybe, just maybe, this story could be more than mine. Maybe it could be a story that forces the world to ask itself, how many more Alex, how many more children will it take before someone finally says, enough? Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and almost peaceful, but the tension in the house hadn't gone away. The children stirred quietly in their beds, and I stayed by their side for a few moments, letting the warmth of their small hands calm the remnants of my fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little of the weight lift from my shoulders. The storm hadn't passed completely, but there was a quiet promise in the air that change was possible. The CEO was gone for the day, meeting after meeting, probably plotting, probably scheming, but his absence felt different now. He no longer loomed over me with the same invisible control. Something had shifted the night before. He had realized that fear alone could not command loyalty, that cruelty could not erase truth. I moved quietly through the house, tidying up, making breakfast, preparing for the day. The twins followed me, chatter returning slowly to their voices, their laughter small but real. And as I watched them, I saw a side of them no one had ever seen before. The side of children who just needed someone to care, someone to believe in them, someone to fight for them. Days passed like this, tense, but slowly becoming more manageable. The children tested boundaries less, and their father, while still distant, seemed less threatening. It wasn't a perfect home. It wasn't suddenly safe forever. But it was different, and sometimes that was enough. I thought about the other nannies who had come before me, the ones who left quietly, afraid, defeated. I thought about how easily fear can silence people, how quickly pain is normalized, and how often those who suffer are invisible to the world. And I realized what had happened here wasn't just a private struggle. It was a reflection of a bigger truth, one that many ignore. Power unchecked breeds cruelty. Silence protects it. And children, innocent children, pay the price. That thought weighed on me, heavy but necessary. I had survived, yes, but survival wasn't enough. I had a responsibility now, to remember, to speak, to make sure this story didn't vanish into the shadows like so many others. I knelt beside the twins one evening, brushing a stray lock of hair from their foreheads, and whispered, "No one should ever make you feel like this is normal. Not ever." They held my hands and nodded, their small trust giving me strength I hadn't realized I had left. The house still had its secrets. The past could not be erased. But what we had built, what we had survived, was something real. Something that could not be broken. And as I packed my small bag weeks later to finally leave, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the danger had passed, at least for now. Sadness because no one should have to endure what we had. But I left with my head high, carrying the memories, the lessons, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the story would reach someone who needed to hear it. Because this is not just a story about 2 children and 1 woman. It is about the courage to stand when fear surrounds you, the power of care when cruelty seems unstoppable, and the unbreakable bond that can form when someone finally refuses to look away. So I ask you, what would you do if you were in my place? How far would you go to protect those who cannot protect themselves? How long would you stand when the world tells you to run? These are questions that don't have easy answers. But maybe, if enough people pause to ask them, enough lives can change. Maybe the silence can finally end. And as I walked away from that mansion for the last time, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Fragile, trembling, and real. And I knew this was a story I would carry forever. Not just as a memory, but as a warning, a lesson, and a promise that even in the darkest places, courage can shine through.